Hello people of the internet, it's Amanda, and for today's video, we're here to talk about Kurosagi episode 2. Now, if you're new here, I talk about Asian dramas, Asian movies, and all those things, but I mostly focus on J-dramas and J-movies. I usually talk about them once they're done or once I'm done watching them, but since I'm also a huge fan of king&prince and Hirano Sho, I decided to make a video for every single episode of Kurosagi after they air, and here we are. Now, I already have a playlist ready, so you can click on the past videos down in the description below. But with that said, let's just get to it. So the theme for episode 2 is that it's a contract scam or a terms and conditions type of scam where people sign formal agreements but don't really read through the fine print or certain implications that are in the contracts, and therefore it gets them into financial trouble. Now, the tricky thing about this one is because you voluntarily signed and there are very specific terms and conditions that are laid out in the document that you're signing, it's quite tricky to at least elevate it to court simply because because of certain loopholes or anything or technicalities and stuff like that. It's definitely a lot of effort to prove that the other party is wrong, and the burden is really on you in saying that you've been tricked into signing this particular agreement. So it's really tricky to just go about it, again, simply because these types of frauds, you voluntarily do something and you voluntarily agree on something, and it's only until later that you realize that you've been manipulated into it. And that's basically the premise for this story. Now, the layers for Kurosagi episodes I've noticed is that there's a bigger arc, a smaller arc, and then the underlying arc about Kurosaki's backstory or personal life, and that's what we're going to dissect in today's video, starting with the bigger arc of the narrative. Now, as I mentioned, it's a contract type of scam, and it's also very similar to how the first case or the bigger case in the episode was laid out. The story is about Emoto-san. She's a fan of an idol group called TankTops, and she got targeted by an ad saying that this detective agency can connect you to people that you want to have chance encounters with or second chances with or anything like that. And one of their categories or the services that they offer is they can make you meet idol groups or celebrities that you would want to have a chance encounter with. Interested by that particular prospect, so she hires the detective service and pays money, and then she's given information as to how she can recreate the chance encounter with the idol. Now, the interesting thing about this is, I mean, in real life, this is definitely something that has a lot more layers to it. Obviously, fans should know their boundaries when it comes to the personalities or the idols that they admire. And at the same time, even idols have this certain responsibility to not use the power that they have over fans to take advantage of them. So it's a very, very tricky topic, but they approach this in a more wholesome and heartfelt kind of way, where Emoto-san's intention in wanting to meet the idols isn't anything creepy, but she simply wants to thank them for making her feel good and making her feel okay and making her want to do her best, because she sees that that's what they're doing as well. It's kind of like that, inspiring that kind of motivation in her, and she wants to express or convey those feelings in person to these idols by creating this scenario where they kind of bump into each other and she would be given the opportunity to do so. Now, again, as I mentioned, this is a very wholesome take on the matter, on the issue. Of course, in real life, this is something that's very different. There's a lot of, again, very complicated things that go into it, but for the intents and purposes of the series, so they made it so that it's just something very nice and clean and wholesome, and there's nothing creepy or weird about the intention of Emoto-san, which I totally get. I mean, the idea of the drama itself is about the scams after all, and not really into this whole complicated celebrity fan dynamic. But yeah. But anyways, she pays money, she signs this contract, it seems like it's all detailed, everything, whatever. But the point is, they never really defined what it means. If she was handed the schedule of the idols, and stuff like that. But I wouldn't disclose too much details about it in case you haven't seen the episode yet. But basically, there's something about the contract that didn't pan out. And initially she thought that, she has a say in it, because on the surface it seems like she has a point that she can refund her money because of like the events that happened and stuff like that. But it was explained to her that because they didn't really define certain terminologies in the contract, so that means it's hard to prove whether or not she was in the right or wrong. Even if, like, in general, if you read through the statement of the contract, she has a point and she can fight through this, but it is very complicated taking this to court and proving all those things. So again, this is what makes contract or agreement type of frauds very, very difficult and challenging. Another thing is she also even if, again, the contract itself has loopholes, as Kurosaki has explained, again, it's very, very difficult to like deal with all of that, simply because these types of scams had the other party or the person who was victimized agreeing wholeheartedly to it and giving their permission to everything that is listed in the contract. Now, in full Kurosaki fashion, of course, he was able to turn things around using very similar methods as to what the swindler did to Emoto-san. There was this line in the end of it where which is interesting because, again, Hirano Sho is an idol, so it's very interesting how they played it off in a way that, he said that maybe Emoto-san's feelings wouldn't be conveyed to the idols that she admires. And then there's this certain like indifference in his voice when he said it, but then he continued on in saying that, but the idea is, you're doing your best for them and they're doing their best for you, and that's all that matters. And again, even if there's like money involved or anything like that, like it should be the person's choice as to how they're putting their support, because of how like there's this still level of mutuality happening in that kind of parasocial relationship, which again is another issue of its own, or another topic of its own. But yeah, I think that it's very straightforward, and it's also very interesting because for sure the writers know that a lot of Sho's fans or a lot of Kimpori fans are watching the series and would be able to like relate to that particular arc about Emoto-san being grateful to the idols and personalities that she admires. And it's quite interesting just how they played it all out there. The scriptwriter for Kurosagi also tweeted that after they shot that particular scene where Kurosaki said that maybe Emoto-san's feelings wouldn't be conveyed or to that the person that you admire and stuff like that, Sho after that scene said that his heart ached at delivering those kinds of lines, obviously because he's also an idol, and there's definitely this relationship that goes on with like the fan support and how it also motivates someone in his particular field, and just the back and forth of those kinds of like mutual emotions, and just that relationship between a fan and a celebrity and what support means in a way. So it's just a very interesting arc. And again, I understand like why a lot of people really was captured by that, simply because, again, for the audience of this series, mostly I think being Kimpori fans or just fans of idols in general, and yeah, so it's a very interesting arc that they handle, and it's also something that's very current and modern. But then on the flip side, so another like the sub case that was happening in this particular episode about one of the tenants in Kurosaki's apartment that he's the landlord of. So there's this character, Amano-san. He's an elderly man who people in like other tenants in the apartment, they were all very aloof with each other. And then Tsurara just witnessed that, there's a delivery that came in, and then Amano-san was sort of like questioning what was happening and stuff like that, and then eventually he just accepts it because he didn't want any other fuzz that the other tenants and Kurosaki as well was making a huge deal of. And then Tsurara later on learns that what happened was Amano-san got a call from this number saying that, you know, they're offering this service where it's like a home meal subscription plan, so that even if you're living alone you can eat healthy. And of course, like he said, that he recognized how he wanted to like drop the call immediately, but then because of the tactic of the other person on the phone, where it's pretty overwhelming, like they keep on feeding him information and saying all these things, like talking very fast paced, and like you couldn't really get out of it, like even if he was at first very dejected of the call. It's kind of like, you know, but this is something that would be beneficial to you, blah blah blah, all those things. And so eventually he gave in, and he admitted that because he hasn't really talked to anyone in a while, it made like the prospect of talking to this person on the other line something that's very exciting and exhilarating and overwhelming. That when he was asked to sign this contract or to hit the like agree on the terms and conditions about the subscription plan, he just did it on a whim. And he said that talking to the police about that, like you getting swept up in this entire scenario as to why you agreed into something because you felt lonely, because you haven't really talked to anyone recently, and that moment was a moment of excitement for you. It's something that feels pitiful and embarrassing, and so why report in the first place? And he said that, you know, they said that I can get out of it after 6 months. So he was just letting this happen to him, like them charging him for other things in the subscription that he wasn't aware of. Yeah, it was, I think, as compared to Emoto-san, this one is also pretty heartbreaking to watch. Especially like as the producers of Kurosagi mentioned, you know, it's based from scams that are happening currently in Japan. So to know that other people are taking advantage of feelings of isolation of people, especially like I've read this thing where they said that these kinds of subscription scams escalated, especially during the pandemic, probably because people couldn't leave their homes and they were just so excited to have someone to talk to again or to interact with, and that craving for human interaction and connection again sparked this level of excitement that forced them into, or manipulated them into, agreeing into something that is very fast-paced and what's being asked of them and requested from them. So like Amano-san was just willing to make it happen for him simply because of that. Like there's also that level of sadness in there in terms of admitting that that was a reason why you got swept up in that situation in the first place. And so Tsurara was sort of like contemplating, you know, what to do and stuff like that. And then Kurosaki explained that he already dealt with it because he also heard what happened. And what he did was he called the support center of the program that was providing the subscription service and said that it was his grandfather who subscribed to it and died from food poisoning from the service, and he was ready to take it on the internet, you know, to spread the news and stuff like that. And of course, because these types of scams, they don't really want any noise happening that would gain attraction or attention to them. So Kurosaki solved it by doing that, by threatening them and scaring them away, you know. And so because of that, like Kurosaki was explaining that like there's no harm done. Like it's just how things are, you know, how things work. You have to use your wits in terms of dealing with these kinds of things in the swiftest way possible. But of course, Rara, she's someone who has very strong convictions. again, she's an aspiring prosecutor, so definitely she believes, she has this idealistic view in terms of like how the law may not be perfect, but it's there because of certain reasons. But Kurosaki explains that reality is, that's just not how things work. Kurosaki said that, prosecutors, Turara aspires to be one, and there are certain prosecutors where they would rather not lose their winning streak and just go about cases that are easier to win than actually go for something that that means something to another person. And therefore, like, Turara's views is very flawed in Kurosaki's perspective, whereas for Turara, there's always this better way out in terms of how to approach things. And I really like how they're like connecting the relationship between the two characters so far, because that shows how we can interpret things in two different ways and have that particular tension, like how you view justice. It can't be like the two extremes that both Turara and Kurosaki represent. So it's really, really interesting, like an interesting dynamic to watch. And I do feel like that entire exchange was brilliantly written from the producers and the writers' perspective as to how they wanted to convey that. But anyways, in terms of Amano-san, so that one was also solved because of what Kurosaki did. And yeah, after tying all the ends, there's also the arc about Kurosaki's personal story, where we learn more stuff about his backstory, how he got into Katsuragi's care. He was well aware of, the situation between Katsuragi's role and Mikimoto and what happened to his family. But in the end, because there was nothing to do, he asked to be trained into this life of being a swindler, which explains the very complicated relationship between the two of them. I like that Hayase Kaneko has a more active role in this particular episode. I wish to see more of her because I absolutely just love her. I love her character so much. And I love that finally they're giving her a lot more like screen time and a lot more participation in how most of the things escalated to how it is now. And then there's also Kashina, who's developing this kind of like obsession in terms of why he wants to pursue this Kurosagi guy. And I'm really curious as to how they're gonna reveal Kashina's backstory and how it all connects to his resentment towards swindlers, because it would really add a layer of value as to why he's just so obsessed with Kurosaki and his methods. And they meet at last and he introduces himself, but then he just gives him a punch, which I feel like is something that not a police officer should and can do. But maybe in his mind, Kurosaki couldn't do anything about it anyways. But yeah, but it's just really interesting how even Kurosaki's personal life is kind of like evolving. And yeah, and also again, going back to Amano-san, it went full circle in a way that the other tenants, they all seem kind of like these misfits in this apartment that Kurosaki created as a home. And like, yeah, they're starting to interact a bit more, which is hopefully a lot more helpful to Amano-san and stuff. But like overall, I do feel like, again, as compared to the pilot episode, this is definitely a lot lighter in terms, like, again, it's still very hard, it's still very painful to watch, like especially with Amano-san, and also the manipulation of Emoto-san's feelings of gratefulness into, getting them into trouble for things that they don't really deserve. But it's definitely a lot lighter as compared to what happened in episode 1, where it's a lot more intense. Still very, very good, because again, it covered this sort of like case of the week narrative, but at the same time, we still have this like underlying story of developing Kurosaki and who he is as a character and his relationships with the other characters that surrounds him. I like that they inserted that bit with Tatsuki-san, who is Turara's father, and he has this like sort of like a nice uncle fatherly kind of moment with Kurosaki. Another thing that I really like is the way that the details in terms of creating the character dynamics, that you don't really need to have it spoken out loud. Like, for example, Kurosaki loves sweets. Like, we see it in the episodes, he's just eating sweets, especially in episode 2. And then Katsuragi runs a sweets shop, but he never eats anything from Katsuragi's shop because, again, there's this, it explains a lot about the relationship even if it's not being said out loud, you know, like just the choice of the writers to make it that Katsuragi runs a sweets shop and Kurosaki is obviously in love with sweets, but they're showing this like disconnect whenever Kurosaki is there and the food. He's not like, again, that's just brilliant details like that I absolutely love. I also love the parallelism used specifically with anko or red bean paste, where it's one of the main ingredients in Katsuragi's in the food that Katsuragi serves in his restaurant. We see this in episode 1, and usually, you know, it shows the dynamic again with Kurosaki and in Katsuragi, because we also see that the red bean buns that Tsurara's parents make is something that Kurosaki really enjoys and eats heartily. So those two things, like, it's just one ingredient, but it creates this entire like character dynamic that shows how Kurosaki is with different characters, you know. And I do feel like it's such a brilliant thing on the writer's part to be able to like create those kinds of details. Other things about this, I really love the direction style so far. I missed talking about it when I talked about my episode 1 video, but I noticed and I tweeted about this as well, where there's this scene where Kurosaki was reflected in the wall while the videographers that they hired was confronting Kasuga. So I think that kind of like camera work was really great, and kudos to the director for having that particular scene. I think it's very meticulously shot, which I really like. Again, the choice in terms of highlighting different emotions through tight shots and wide shots, the way that the focus is changing in some scenes, it really adds to the mood of just basically everything. And again, also the timing of when Tsukiyomi plays in the end, when there's like the more intense parts of what leads to the ending of the episode and sort of like a teaser for the next episode. Tsurara already found out, or sort of like had an inkling as to what Kurosaki's backstory is, because she looked it up. And that entire reveal of, you know, Kashina was catching up to Kurosaki, and then Tsurara, juxtaposed with Tsurara finding things out, and then Tsukiyomi was playing in the background. That entire ending was very well orchestrated. I just absolutely love how that entire thing, how that sequence was, how it was edited, how the flow of the events were. Again, episode 1 really intense. Episode 2 definitely a good follow-up to the first episode. I'm really excited because I saw that in the preview of episode 3, Shiraishi is going to be there already. I'm really excited because Shiraishi is one of the characters in the manga and also in the other version that has this very complicated dynamic with Kurosaki as well. But it's not like Katsuragi complicated or Mikimoto complicated. It's just that they have their own complicated dynamic, and I'm really excited about that. I'm also seeing some, not really flirting, but moments, like the moments between Kurosaki and Tsurara are finally starting or kickstarting in episode 3. Like it's less antagonistic, I feel like, and I'm really excited how that's gonna pan out. And again, it's because it's really curious how they have very different perspective on things, and I like that they represent two extremes, and it kind of explains like how in the real world things aren't just as easy as black and white, which is what Tsurara and Kurosaki sort of like represents in this in terms of the idea of justice. But this was the kind of tension that I was looking for in terms of their characters, simply because like it's already out there that there are gonna be like, you know, romantic implications in terms of their relationship, but it's kind of like interesting how it's gonna be, because it's the first time probably in Kurosaki's life that someone, and also someone as the same age as him, talks to him so straightforwardly about the things that he already knows about, but at the same time something that he doesn't want to confront because he faced the realities of that in a different kind of way. And that entire dynamic is what makes the angst in his relationship with Sorara very, very interesting. And I don't know, I'm just pretty excited how everything else would pan out, simply because I've been loving how the episodes are. And I think just in general, like biases aside as well, again, as I mentioned, I really like Shaw's acting in a way, but just how the episodes are being paced so far, I really like it, because there's definitely not a lot of like it's there, but it's not too much, you know. They just know when to stop telling a story and putting pauses or periods on plots and arcs for everything to still make sense but still have that connection. So I'm really liking that so far, and I'm really happy as to how the episodes are going so far. And yeah, looking forward to episode 3 and doing this again next week. So with that said, tell me down in the comments below, what are your thoughts on Kurosagi episode 2? I'm really curious how you're finding the series so far, because I'm just so excited. I'm probably gonna rewatch episode 2 over and over again now, because I've seen episode 1 a lot of times. So yeah, now if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to my channel and you would want to hear more from me, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you again soon in a new one.